So, Steve, you've operated through multiple economic cycles. I feel like the past 20 years there's been tons of stuff going on with the economy. And that includes the 2008 and recent inflationary periods. Let's talk about building a recession-resistant business model. So, how did you survive, and did you adjust anything within your operations during those times?
Yeah, let's talk specifically about 2008. That's a very interesting time, the Great Recession. The Great Recession. So I didn't realize it at the time, but I loved Moe's because it was a value brand. You had free chips and salsa. You got free chips and salsa with your burrito. So it was a value brand. And so what happened during 2008 is that there were a lot of customers that we lost in that time period to brown bagging. They didn't have the budget anymore to eat out so much at Moe's Southwest Grill. So they would brown bag it, bring their own brown bag lunch to work, or find other alternatives to eat. But we also, because we were a value-based brand, I think we picked up a lot of people that were casual dining, spending $12 to $15 per entree. So they traded down, and then we had some customers that traded down, and so it was a net effect. Our sales were okay. And so that was one of the fortunate things that I lucked into, basically, was picking a brand that was value-based, and so it was resistant during the Great Recession.
So I'm guessing you're scaling during that time too, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
you're taking on debt. Did any of the terms on the debt change during that period?
No, thankfully, our sales were okay during that time period, again, because we were a value-based brand, that it did not affect any of our loan terms. We didn't have to renegotiate into that. We didn't have to go to the landlords like we saw during COVID, go to the landlords and ask for rent reduction or rent abatement or some type of discount on rent. We didn't have to do that because our sales were okay. So that's a valuable lesson.
That's great to know. And what is the most common mistake that entrepreneurs make when banking on debt for expansion?
I think one of the biggest mistakes that is made is over leverage. I think you try to grow too fast. You have to maintain quality operations. There's three things that are most important in the restaurant industry: operations, operations, operations. There's nothing more important than operations. Back to what we were talking about earlier: food quality, cleanliness, customer service, and speed. You got to be hitting on those metrics all the time. And when you're hitting on those metrics all the time, you should see your same-store sales continue to grow. And when your same-store sales are going up, you can continue to take on more leverage. You've got cash in the bank. You can put the 20% down on a new location. You can finance the rest, and everything's hunky-dory. When you start missing on those metrics and your sales start to decline, that's when you start to experience the squeeze. You're taking on more debt and your sales are coming down, and it's a pinch. It's not a good scenario to be in.
Wow. So you mentioned store sales, and as we think about a restaurant's or any business's profit and loss statement, every business, well, as of now, despite AI, every business has labor cost.
Mm-hmm.
And labor cost is a really big metric on a restaurant's profit and loss statement. When it comes to labor cost spiking or inflation hitting, all the prices around your area is going to go up, so that means your operation prices may go up. Is there anything that you have done to protect your brand and customer loyalty without losing customers?
So I would say that inflation affects everything, except for rent. This is very interesting. So inflation affects hourly labor for sure, but it also affects burger price and burrito price. So when inflation doesn't happen overnight, it's a gradual process. It's a slow, gradual process. But interestingly, inflation does not adversely affect your rent. And the reason why is when I would negotiate rents with landlords, I would negotiate a 10-year primary term with 3 5-year options. So my rent for the first 10 years was set, pre-negotiated. Every 5 years, you'd have a 10% bump in rent. And so As inflation goes up, my rent is set. So my rent never went up. It just went up every 5 years. And then we had 3 5-year options after the 10-year primary period, primary term. So what I'm saying is that, yes, inflation adversely affects hourly labor. It will go up gradually. It doesn't happen quickly, but it does happen. But you also can, commensurate with that, you can take burrito price up and burger price up. You can take your prices up.
So, when you mentioned burrito, it gave me PTSD just because I am so like, man, that was
Welcome to Moe's.
Oh my gosh, what that and just the customers just screaming at a 17-year-old over a burrito. It's like,
Yes.
Sir, it's not that big of a deal. But we still talk about pricing, right? Does the franchisor focus brands have any control over your pricing for your individual stores?
Yes, they suggest. I'm gonna do open quotations here. They suggest pricing. They have price tiers for markets. So they'll say price tier 5 is New York City, price tier 1 is Columbia, South Carolina, maybe price tier 3 is Charlotte, North Carolina. This is the suggested, highly recommended pricing that we have for your market. So yes, they will provide guidance on pricing. They have to be careful. They can't, in some cases, they can't force you.
Yeah.
They can't mandate that you charge those prices, because I think we get into price collusion and price fixing. So that it's highly suggested or recommended.
So thank you for giving a context earlier about the franchisor and franchisee model and that dynamic and how that works. Mo Mondays is a thing. Discounted burritos. So you're an owner of a Mo's, and you didn't make the decision to have Mo Mondays. And so I guess that affects all the location. How does the franchisor take care of any inconvenience for you as an operator?
Well, there are going to be inconsistencies across the brand specific in some cases. I remember early on with Mo's, there were some markets that were doing Mo Mondays. There were some markets that were not. It was kind of a hodgepodge. Sometimes they included the drink in the Mo Monday offer. Sometimes they did not. Some markets did not. So it was very inconsistent. I think over time they cleaned that up. I think it's more of a national program now. And I think that's what the franchisor wants. You want to have the same experience when you go to California as you go to the Carolinas. You want to experience the same restaurant. So the franchisor really is pushing for these national promotions and consistency across the brand for sure.
So your first location was in Columbia, South Carolina. And as we talked about real estate a little bit in this interview, and then in the last interview, location matters. You were near a university, which funneled a lot of traffic into your store. So with you setting a higher baseline with your first store being high performing, how do you distinguish between a temporary underperforming unit with one that's structurally broken?
Okay, so you just touched on real estate, and I really want to do a tangent on real estate.
Yeah.
I love real estate, and for your listeners, you need to learn how to love real estate. So the most important thing post opening is operations. Pre-opening is picking an A++ location. I knew that in the top 10 Mo's in the system, I knew that 3 or 4 of them were by university campuses. So when I found out that I could open my first unit at the University of South Carolina, it didn't have one parking place. But what I did was I went down there and I just sat. And at 11:30, I sat right in front of the location. This not a Moe's yet. It's an old dilapidated building, and it was formerly a restaurant that had closed down. It had turned into a nightclub for a little while, and it didn't do very well. No, definitely didn't go to this nightclub.
Oh, that one.
Yeah. So I remember sitting there, and classes were changing at the University of South Carolina, and this swell of people just came out with their book bags, walking right in front of the restaurant, where the restaurant would be. And I was like, man, all of these people are going to be hungry at 12 o'clock. Mm-hmm. And then I would see, the downtown, the large downtown buildings, and I'd see all the workers, white collar workers, coming out of their buildings looking for a place to eat. And so I combined those two. It was a big risk because it didn't have, there's still no parking places for that unit. Zero. Zero
Wow.
parking places. Downtown environment. But the groundswell of people, the people walking in front of the store, the white collar workers, knowing and finding out within the franchise, 3 or 4 of the units, the top units nationally were by college campuses. Mm-hmm. By putting all that together, I was able to open this unit, and it became the #1 unit in the state of South Carolina. Pretty cool.
Yeah, that's very cool.
But on real estate, I encourage your listeners to really become an expert at real estate. There's a 2D evaluation of real estate, and there's a 3D evaluation of real estate. What I mean by that, 2D is what it looks like on paper. Your commercial broker is going to shove stuff to you, push stuff to you.
That's not where I thought you were going.
No.
Sorry.
That's all right. No. Hopefully they don't shove you.
Yeah.
But they're going to push stuff to you that on 2D paper, looks great. All right, you've got a wonderful grocery store anchor. You've got great co-tenants. And so I encourage your listeners to become good at not only 2D evaluation, but also 3D. 3D is going there just like I did and sit your rear end down and just evaluate the site. Go into the restaurants that are around there at 12:30. Go into the grocery store. How many people are in there? Go at different times during the day. Go at 12:30. Go at 7 o'clock. Are there butts and seats for the restaurant? Evaluate ingress and egress. Evaluate exterior signage. Where is your signage going to be? And evaluate line of sight. I was evaluating a site that looked great 2D the other day. Mm-hmm. And when I drove past it, there's trees all in front of the center. It's in a depression. It's been dug out. So this particular highway has 40 to 50,000 cars a day, but you're flying right past it. You can't see it because it's obscured by trees. So line of sight is important. Parking is so 2D. You look at a parking field on 2D and you're like, oh, there's plenty of parking spaces. Then you go there at 12:30 and you're circling the parking lot. You can't find anywhere to park. Great example, Panera Bread, where you and I used to meet.
Yeah.
In South Park.
Yeah.
We would try to meet there at 12:30.
It's full. When
you look at it 2D, you're like, oh, there's plenty of parking spaces. Then you go there at 12:30, you can't find a space.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Okay, so become really good at evaluating a site 2D wise, and then evaluating it 3D wise. Another 2D analysis is demographics. Really get good. Just define and describe. You can use AI, by the way. Use AI. Go to Claude, go to Perplexity, go to ChatGPT.
It's not sponsored, by the way, right? Not sponsored.
I use them all.
Unless they want to sponsor us, then we can. Yeah.
I'm indiscriminate. I use them all. But go to all of them and say, hey, pretend like you're a 50-year veteran in the restaurant industry. Tell me the top 10 demographics that you would want to target for your #1 location in this market. And it'll just spit them out, and then just you compare them all together, and then use that target as your guide. And you can go pay $40 yourself. Your commercial broker can provide it to you for free, but you can pay $40 yourself to go pay for a 1, 3, and 5 mile ring around the trade area that you're looking, or the location that you're looking. And you can compare those demographics to what your target analysis is, what your target demographics are. They now too have another 2D analysis is psychographics. That's kind of newer. Psychographics is the customer that is in this trade area. Are they the type of person that would buy your product? Another one is a company called Placer AI that analyzes your cell phone data. I don't know if you knew this or not. We haven't talked about this. Mm-hmm. But Placer AI is a company that analyzes how many cell phones go to this particular trade area in a certain time period. So over the course of a month or a week or a year, you can evaluate how many people have been there, how many unique visits have been there, How long are they staying? That's scary.
Yeah.
They know this data now.
That is,
How long are they staying in this particular grocery store or in this particular workout facility or in this particular whatever concept it is? They can tell you this data now. They're tracking all this. Where do they come from before they arrive to this center? Where do they go after they leave this center? So, okay, so there's a whole bunch of 2D analysis that you can do on paper, on the computer, AI, whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
But it never, it's never as good as driving there.
And being there. Yeah.
Evaluating yourself, getting a feel for the energy, getting the feel for the people, the traffic.
So it's like just specifically knowing about the location. Because AI won't have, there's no way it'll have enough context as you do just being there.
Yes.
So more of the story, location matters. So location is more of kind of like a microeconomic factor. So then we think about macroeconomic factors, especially through certain economic cycles throughout the years. So think political, economical, social, technological, and environmental. So with that, are there with external conditions being out of your control, is there any operating metrics that matter more during this time?
The thing I would say about that is when you have so many units, you really start to learn, I can only focus on what I can control. I can't control inflation. I can't control the Great Recession. I can't control COVID. I can't control this stuff. I can only control what's in my four walls. So back to operations, controlling the four metrics we talked about, the KPIs we talked about, making sure you're executing on those. If those are perfect, if you're hitting on those perfectly, then you know you're doing everything within your power, within your control to execute. That's the one thing I would say about that.
Okay. Thank you for that insight.